This video is sponsored by DraftSite. Building a teardrop trailer camper has been on my maker bucket list for quite a few years now. The appeal of this tiny home on wheels that's light enough to be towed by my little Subaru has been undeniable, and I've spent so many nights curled up in my backseat wishing I had a better way to go mobile in the great outdoors. It's been both too daunting and way too expensive for me to try it, until this summer I finally decided to just take the risk and go for it. And so I designed and built this custom teardrop in exactly 3 weeks. So before I can build my camper, I need some wheels to build the camper onto. I opted for aluminum to keep weight down, so this is a 5x6 foot trailer kit from Trailx that's actually designed for small teardrops. And I was able to get most of it done alone, but sometimes it's just better to have some friends. These are my friends Piper and Nico.
So if you're wondering why the hell we're drawing lines on these, it's A, to make sure that you actually torqued every bolt as you're going through, and then B, so that when you look at this after driving 10,000 miles down the road and you see that these lines are broken, you realize that you maybe shouldn't drive any further before hitting them with some more torque.
The next step was to prep the backyard for 3 weeks of absolute insanity and, more importantly, place the trailer such that it can in fact get wheeled out when it's done being constructed. And before starting assembly, I wanted to protect the marine plywood that's going to be facing the street, so I painted it with a bilge paint. So this is TotalBoat by TotalBoat, and that'll just keep like oil and water and grease off of the wood. Now that we're ready to get started, the first thing to do was to cut down the pre-bilge painted subfloor and mount that to the trailer itself. So I drilled holes up through the trailer and then through the floor and then bolted it down. Okay, one of the really fun lessons I think I learned in this project is that letting people use my shop is one of my love languages, because nothing gave me the warm fuzzies like seeing other people enjoying themselves with my tools. It's just so nice. Anyway, we grabbed some 2x2s and ripped them down into, we grabbed some 2x4s and ripped them into 2x2s so that we could use that to frame out the insulation of the subfloor. Now the construction of the floor is really interesting. So the bottom piece is the 3/4 inch plywood and it extends the entire width of the trailer. But then the next two pieces were inset 3/4 of an inch so that the sidewalls have something vertical to mount to. And with that frame in, it was just a matter of cutting the insulation to fit and popping it in there, and then we could cover that up with the interior floor. To save weight, I used 1/2 inch instead of 3/4 on the interior floor and then just patched up the screw holes with fixed wood. Now it is absolutely possible to do this project by hand. People have been designing things and building things without computers for as long as humanity has existed. However, the only reason I was able to get this project done in 3 weeks is because I designed it in CAD ahead of time. And then I was able to bring all of the rounded pieces over to my friend Rick, who has a 4x8 foot CNC machine, and we were able to cut them all out in one day. And that brings us to a huge thank you to today's sponsor for making that happen. So a huge number of things we use on a daily basis are manufactured from stock flat materials that are cut by CNC mills or laser cutters and folded or assembled, kind of like origami. This process allows us to know exactly how much material we will need and allows us to build gigantic things just like this project. CAD is an indispensable tool for making things accurately and quickly, which is why I'm excited to talk about this video's sponsor, DraftSite. DraftSite is a trusted 2D drafting and 3D design experience from the makers of SolidWorks. You can create, edit, and view 2D and 3D file formats like DWG and DXF. And since DraftSite works seamlessly with SolidWorks, you can share your work with other collaborators. DraftSite has a ton of productivity tools for anyone from engineers to hobbyists, and even has an API for developers. If you're already using a 2D CAD program, feel free to compare DraftSite side by side. It has all of the features and functionality you need, and their subscription model, or a perpetual license if you prefer, is actually quite affordable compared to other solutions out there. Give it a whirl with the free trial on their website by using the link in the description, and let me know what you think by dropping a line in the comments. As always, thanks to you guys for supporting the channel by checking out the sponsor, and thanks to DraftSite for supporting this video. Now, back to it. Before we can actually mount the interior sidewalls, we need something like some kind of internal structure to mount to. So we're cutting out here the vertical piece that sits at the end of your feet, and that will go in first. And we put that in with pocket holes because I figure it's not going to be super visible. So we pocket hold that in, and that will give us something to mount those vertical walls to. And with all the CNC pieces, we need to cut and sand all the little tabs off, which is super easy and quick. All right, are you guys ready to teardrop this fucker?
Yeah!
Yeah! Visible progress. Let's go. Ooh, nice bucket hat.
Yeah.
That's so styling.
Gloves are going on for this one.
To get the sidewalls on, we just lifted it up and pre-drilled and screwed in from the sides into the wood that was there. And it was important to pre-drill because we were countersinking it, since the exterior wall is going to sit flush against this one. And then we went in and did the exact same thing on the other side. And then we went ahead and added one of the cross braces towards the front, and that will hold the two sides perfectly parallel so that we can go in and put in like the kitchenette pieces, the rest of the framing towards the back, knowing that the sides are straight. Strength test. Woohoo!
Brag.
Next, it was time for the structural cross braces. So we pocket hold each of the little inset pouches that we CNC'd out for the braces to sit in, cut the braces down, and installed about half of them, leaving a gap for the roof vent where we have to cut a curved, like perfectly fit, angled piece that can hold the vent. Moment of truth.
Moment of truth.
Moment of truth. I think we're perfect. And with one perfect fit, it was simply a matter of replicating it. So we did that, and then we went out and installed the rest of the top roof braces. And this brought the lovely first weekend of Nico and Piper helping me to a close. So the next morning I was solo again, and I started doing the exact same thing, framing out the skylight. And I decided that I wanted to have a stargazer window that is like right above where you sleep, and it's gonna be like a crystal clear polycarb window. And with the stargazer window frame in, it was time to prep for putting a roof on this thing. So I started by actually just round over routing all of the pieces so that the plywood that was gonna bend against it didn't have like really hard edges. And then I also took a belt sander to some spots just to kind of even it out and make sure there were no high spots. And then I could get started on actually getting the wiggle wood up. Getting the wiggle wood up for this roof is one of the hardest things I think I've ever tried to attempt solo. But it was just like a lot of creative clamping and use of all appendages, and eventually I made it work. So the general process is I would run a bead of liquid nails on the stud and then nail it in with a nail gun. And you know, have you truly lived until you've tried to rip a 4x8 sheet of wiggle wood down on the table saw by yourself? I think not, but I am proud to say that I have now lived. And then that little strip was a much more manageable install. And then with the interior roof installed until that skylight area, I was able to go in and put the rest of the brace pieces on. And I waited and left it open so it'd be easier to get that like full sheet of plywood in and up against the top. But now that it's already in, I can put these brace pieces on no problem. So I screwed them in and then went and did the exact same thing with liquid nails and electric nails to install the roof. And while I was at it, I cut this like funky angled piece for the bottom so that the exterior roof has something to meet. I also bilge painted the bottom half of the kitchen galley area just because I felt like that was the area that was gonna leak. I don't know, it was a hunch. And then with the main frame looking pretty good, I enlisted the help of my friend Natalie to start work on the kitchen galley hatch. And this was, I think, the hardest part. Just structurally, it was like really difficult. But the curved pieces we did on the CNC, and then we had to cut the cross braces with little notches in them so that the curved pieces could sit inside. And then I think the key here was assembling it and clamping it together in place and then bringing it into the shop to screw together. But by putting it together in place, we knew it was gonna fit. And then there was this tricky part of cutting the angle of where the hatch meets the main frame, and that's the bottom piece of the hatch. And once that was cut, screwed in and assembled, it was time to start gluing the skin on. For the main body of the trailer, I used all 1/4" wiggle wood, so the interior roof and then the exterior roof, which you'll see soonish. But for the galley hatch, I've heard a lot of stories of the plywood like pulling it open a little bit, so I actually opted for 2 sheets of 1/8" plywood, and then you kind of get the bent lamination effect where it even makes it stronger because of the glue. And so we just put down liquid nails, glued it on, and threw some nails in there as well. Next, it was time to cut out the holes for the skylight and the roof vent in the interior roof, and so I did that just by drilling a big hole and then trim routing up against the frame.
Busted a hole in my perfectly good ceiling. Let there be light.
Yeah, that like opens up the space.
Yeah. Really does. Alright. This guy's gonna be miserable. I have a doctor's appointment in 30 minutes. My doctor's gonna think I'm insane.
Are you okay?
Yeah, just a little dandruff, you know. Nothing some Head and Shoulders can't fix. Next, I installed the shelf for the interior cabinet, and the trick for this is that, like, to avoid pocket holes or just seeing screw heads in general, I was trying to come in from the sides as much as possible because the external walls will cover all of those screw heads. So we held it in place, marked where it was going to be, pilot holed out from the inside, and then held it in place as we screwed it in through those pilot holes from the outside, if that makes sense. And then since my plywoods didn't match, I thought it looked kind of funky, so I decided to paint a lot of it white. It's still going to have a lot of wood interior, but the plywood I turned white. For the cabinet itself, I used a nice piece of cherry plywood, and that will match the exterior of the trailer, and cut it to size, and then I routed the doors out so that the grain would match all the way across. And I did that sort of just by building a little frame, running the router up against the frame, and then I had doors. And then the important thing was I pre-drilled the hinges before we put the cabinet in. And even though I didn't put the hinges and the doors on, it'll make sure that once they do go on, they're straight because we lined it up while it was horizontal on a table. Since the cabinet face is entirely non-structural, to put it up, to install it, we just put a bead of construction adhesive on each face, on all the faces that would meet each other, and then like put it up, squared it, and used a bunch of nails. And that way we didn't have to worry about ugly screw heads or anything like that. For the smaller shelf that will sit under the cabinet, I did it exactly the way I did the cabinet shelf, except out of cherry plywood because it's going to be visible. And to match the cherry theme for the headboard, I decided to make out of a solid piece of cherry, so I just cut it down to size, and then the tricky part was measuring the angle of where the back wall meets the floor, and then cut that into the piece with the table saw, and then I decided to chamfer the edge a little for a little artistic flair, and then install it. And that headboard closed up the interior, so we were ready to put on the exterior walls and the roof. But first, we had to sneak in all of the wiring so that it would be invisible. And it's going to be completely sandwiched between the interior and exterior roofs, which is a little bit scary because if something goes wrong, like there isn't really a way to go in and fix it. But you can always run a visible wire if you really need to. So all of the wiring happened. We did all of the switches, the lights, etc., and then ran that towards the front of the trailer where it will poke out of the exterior roof and into a tongue box that houses the battery and all of the wiring harnesses and fuse box and stuff. Okay, so we're gonna test the lights for the first time. And so all the wiring is running up through here. Do it.
Let's go over there.
Ah! With the structural interior and the wiring completed, we were clear to put those exterior walls on. So I did this with a ton of construction adhesive. I just went ham on it because I really didn't want any screw heads showing. And then we placed it, and I could put screws along the bottom where it'll be covered by an aluminum like scratch plate. And then we also put screws in from the top inside the roof, if that makes sense. So like the spots in between each of the braces, we could put a screw from the inside going out. Piper!
Yeah!
Look! We put up a side!
Yes, we did. It looks fantastic.
I'm just excited. Nico! Look! We put up a side!
Yeah!
Yeah! I just like punched it on you and it's way too dark.
I have clamps.
He has clamps. A man with a clamp. I guess they're... Cut. Cut. And then with one happy side on, we of course went and did the other side. It is now nighttime, so we get to... Ah!
Whoa!
Wow, it is very bright. The next morning I got to work on some more interior stuff, so I trimmed the cherry shelf to make it look a little nicer, and so you don't see the plywood edge. And then I also began varnishing all of the cherry and wood inside, and it made it look so good. And then I also, as sort of an afterthought, decided to add little reading lights. So these are like touch activated lights, and I think they kind of class the place up. And also the main overhead lights were so bright last night that I thought this would be like a nice dimmer option. Next, I cut and fit all of the foam insulation so that we could get ready and install that exterior roof. And the exterior roof is put on with, again, liquid nails on all of the wooden braces, and then nails straight in through the 1/4-inch wiggle wood. And just like the inside with the 4x8 sheet on, there was still a strip that needed to be cut, so we cut the second one, and of course it wasn't like a perfect square, so it involved just a teeny little bit of sanding and fitting. Got nothing. Then for the small gap at the bottom, we cut 2 smaller pieces so that we could mount them, and we wanted the gap in the middle for all of the wires to come out. To prep for fiberglassing, I gave everything a quick once-over with the sander just to get out any like scratches and scuffs or things that could get picked up or highlighted by the glass. And then I went ahead and did a massive scale 8-foot fiberglassing job all by myself. And you know what? I nailed it. I'm super proud. I guess that's sort of par for the course on the Xyla Foxlin covers everything in Boat epoxy and fiberglass channel, but you just let me have this one because it was like pretty tough. And I used the same technique that I always do, and I think I share on like pretty much all of my videos on this channel, where it's really important to lay your glass out, and in this case I actually taped it down so that it would stay, since this was vertical. That made it like extra challenging. And then I just run my hands over it and flatten it out before epoxy even gets involved, because as soon as you get epoxy and you get like bubbles in your epoxy, you're kind of screwed. So you want to make sure it's like a perfect layup before the epoxy even gets mixed. Another important thing to note is that I didn't wait until sunset so that I could get this beautiful sun glare in the camera. It was actually because, I mean, it's August in Los Angeles, and epoxy really shouldn't be worked with at above 75 or 80 degrees, especially for something this big, where I needed to mix all of the epoxy at once and let it sit there, and so I didn't want it to exotherm. So I had to wait for the sun to set and for it to cool down so that it would go flawlessly. Now, the main reason that I'm fiberglassing this at all is because this cherry plywood is not technically exterior grade, and I got worried that the water would damage it and it just wouldn't be able to stand up to the test of time. And the other reason is that I really wanted to be able to wrap the fiberglass over the corner and like completely waterproof the whole seal. So that's why it goes all the way over the corner, and then it also wraps into the door. And then once a couple hours after I laid it up, I did my usual. So I cut off all the excess epoxy while the resin was still green, which is like a couple hours into the cure. Man, I know I should speed this up, but it is just so unbelievably satisfying. And once it was trimmed, I went in with a flood coat of epoxy, so a second coat, to fill the weave of the fiberglass. So like after that first coat, it's still a little bit textured, and I want to get it totally smooth so that I can sand it without digging into the weave, and that'll leave the fiberglass invisible. And the next morning, it was time to skin the roof in aluminum. So this is 0.04 clear anodized aluminum, and this first piece I had to prep by putting on a connector for flexible conduit so that the wires could run out of the roof and into the tongue box. So I fed those through, and then we were really ready to skin.
Are you ready? Are we ready? I think I'm ready.
I'm not ready. I'm not emotional. Just like with a lot of other things on this project, I started with construction adhesive, but for the aluminum, I was a little nervous that the beads would actually show through the aluminum, so I used a V-notch trowel to spread it out and then get my like really...
I feel like you can never have too much adhesive.
It's probably worth noting that the aluminum panels were cut to the distance between braces, so all of the screws are going to go into the studs. And then the kind of weird order of operations here is that the two outer panels, so like the back and the front panels, went on first, so that the middle panel would go over both of them, and the seams would be pointing down, so like the best direction for water on both of those. So that made installation a little bit tricky because you couldn't just like, you know, drag and scale it up, but it should help with water runoff. I need more clamps. Hey Rocco, can I have more clamps?
Sponsored by.
This was another instance also of, I think, that it was just too hot for the construction adhesive and it was drying too quickly. I mean, this was like absolute direct sunlight, middle of summer in the desert, so I'm not that surprised, but we were really fighting the cure time on the adhesive. Next was this really fun adventure in trim routing aluminum, which, although is theoretically possible, it gums up the blade a bunch. And so the easiest way I found to do it is to actually find a second person to chase the blade with WD-40 and be like a human coolant spritzer. And if you don't have a second person, I recommend doing what I did, which is go to my friend Julia's house and hold her houseplant Reginald hostage until she would help me. So, or you could use an oscillating saw, which worked a little better. And then for this one, I only had to stop every so often to add some WD-40 and cool the blade down. And since it was easier with the aluminum skin, I opted for the oscillating saw for the roof vent hole and the stargazer window as well. And with Reginald the succulent still being held hostage and definitely 100% alive at this point, we got to sanding down the epoxy over the fiberglass so that we could varnish. And I really wanted to get the varnish on before the trim goes on so that it'll be like nice and flat under the trim. I'm using my usual favorite varnish, which is Lust by TotalBoat. Forget it. Now, I will point out, because a lot of you guys use the products that I recommend, Lust is not TotalBoat's most popular varnish. It's Gleam, because Gleam is a little easier to use, but I really love the like luster that you get from Lust. It's a little bit thicker and it's more amber, and so I think it just pops and it shines really, really beautifully. So for this, Julia is rolling it on vertically, and then I am tipping it horizontally. Because we're in direct sunlight, we actually didn't have time to roll on horizontally, then roll vertically, and then tip horizontally, although that is probably how you should do it. So we just went straight for the vertical rolls, and then I was chasing with a badger hairbrush and knocking all the bubbles and the roller marks out. And because we were in direct sunlight, we knew we couldn't get a final coat of varnish on, but each coat was drying so quickly. We built up 3 or 4 coats in like the middle of the day in the heat, and then the next day I gave it like a gentle sanding and then could go in for a single final coat that would be like that perfect no streaks, no lumps coat. And for the cabinet handles, I made a single template and then used the same template on all 4 handles on the trim router. For some reason, I am like unreasonably excited to hang these cabinets. I think I'm getting very tired of this project, but this will feel like extremely visible progress, and it's very low hanging fruit. So there's a million other things I could be doing right now, but I'm gonna hang some cabinets. Who needs doors when you have pretty cherry cabinets? No one. Cabinets! We got cabinets! I don't think there's anything insightful I could say in the voiceover here because I'm literally just putting screws in cabinet hinges, except that I was so excited to put them in, I'm gonna make you watch me do it anyway. And then for the back wall of the kitchenette, I opted for a matching cherry veneer just to match the sidewalls, and then interior, it's just classy. All right, so I'd heard the skinning of the galley hatch kind of sucks. What I will say is that if you are doing your own teardrop trailer, skin the galley hatch on a weekend when a bunch of your friends can come over and help, because the more hands, the easier it is. I don't know what it is. It's just lots of annoying fiddly bits. So we put this piece of roofing aluminum that we bent to that angle around first, and then put some glue over that, and then we put the sheet of aluminum over that, and then put the screws through both of those things. And that worked really well. It was just a pain. Like, this whole process was a pain. But it was similar to the exterior in terms of it was liquid nails and then aluminum and screws. And then on the top edge where it meets the trailer, we had to install 1/2 of the hurricane hinge as well as we were putting the aluminum down. So we just cut that down to length and then screwed it in. And with this, it was like, the name of the game is just sealant. Like, we were putting sealant in absolutely everything. We want to make sure that water can't get into any of the wood. Just slide that way. And then the same thing for the hurricane hinge other half, which goes onto the trailer. So the two halves slide together. And you can't really see it here, but actually on this piece, it extends past the trailer by like 3/4 of an inch on each side. And that will help just direct rain away from the trailer. And the last thing that the galley hatch needed was wide trim. So I bent that around, and then the latch installation. Wow, the way this bends is incredibly satisfying.
Yeah.
It's gonna open more. Wait. Oh, yeah. Sliding the galley hatch on is definitely another one of those things that's like big team effort energy, because it's like a big, heavy, unwieldy object and you have to get it straight down the hurricane hinge. And one of the problems we ran into is it probably wasn't perfectly straight. And so we used like a bunch of WD-40, and then eventually we just hit it with a mallet until it was all the way seated. And once it's in place, it opens and closes really smoothly. Nice! Let's go! Let's go! And when it was overcast and a little cooler, we also threw a final coat of varnish on. And it did go better with 2 people rolling and 1 person tipping. One of the design choices I made that I was like really adamant about not skipping, even as the deadline crawled closer and closer and more, everything became more and more unreasonable, was this aluminum swoop. I just think it adds like a kind of a modern and vintage twist to the overall shape. And I haven't seen a curved aluminum like scratch plate yet. So I traced out those shapes and then cut them out with an angle grinder, and then cleaned that up with a Dremel a little bit. My original plan was actually I had that MDF template and I was going to trim router it, but since trim routing just takes forever, I just did a good job cutting it out with the angle grinder and then deburred it with the Dremel. And then it was just a matter of using a ton of liquid nails or construction adhesive and spreading it out so that you couldn't see the beads, and then throwing it on. And I found that actually the 18 gauge electric nail gun worked pretty well on the aluminum, so I threw some nails in there as well. Next, it was time to install the roof vent, so I just placed it and then center punched all the holes, pre-drilled them, and then put down a circumference of butyl tape, and that will be the seal, and then drilled it in, or screwed it in. And once it was firmly secured, we could put the interior piece in as well. This is called interior garnish trim, in case your interior needs garnishing. And while we're on the topic of interior garnishing, I went ahead and cut some trim pieces for the curved corners.
Oh, look at the, oh my god. Perfection. So for every win, there's like a not win, and we just opened up the gas strut packages and they're not compatible. So off to AutoZone or Pep Boys or something. We're gonna get this done. Okay, so the gas spring props that I ordered were wrong, and then we got some at AutoZone and they also didn't work. So now what are we gonna do?
So I've got gas springs in the hatch of my car, which are a little bit larger, so we're gonna give those a try. Needs to support this motor to hold up.
Alright.
So it's gonna get a lot heavier when I pop this bottom one out.
Alright.
There we go. There we go.
Alright.
Cool.
Mission successful.
Here, you want to back off and watch this thing slam down?
Ready? That's what a trunk with no gas spring props looks like.
Next, it was time to put all of the trim on now that the varnish was good and the aluminum was on. This was pretty easy. It was just a matter of bending it to shape and then screwing it in. And the important part is we threw sealant in every screw hole. And any overhanging trim was just easily knocked off with an angle grinder. And what you're seeing here is the very slow and cinematic collapse of my tripod, which led to this very beautiful pan. But you're also seeing me install the magnet latches for the cabinets. All right, I've made a decision that I really hope I won't regret, because we are at like T-2 days. I have not had a day off in 3 weeks. I have this like support, the center piece of the skylight is this like really nice ash that's actually left over from my base, and I put it in there when I was building the whole structure. Like this was, everything else is pine, but this one was ash. But I'm staring at it, and I like laid down in there and I looked out, and I was like, I don't think it needs that support. It definitely doesn't need that support from a structural standpoint. So I'm just gonna cut it off, like without thinking too hard about it, and I'm just gonna do it. And then I'm gonna trim the window. It'll make trimming the window a lot easier. So I prepped the window edges a little bit and then went over to my piece of cherry, cut off a piece, resawed some pieces for trim, and then cut them to shape. And once they fit nicely, I nailed them in and gave them 2 coats of varnish. And man, it classed up the place so much. And while I was at it, I varnished the kitchen veneer as well. To install the Stargazer window / skylight, I started by putting a ring of butyl tape all the way around. And the key with butyl tape is you just make sure that there's no gaps, because it compresses really well and then forms a great seal. So a full ring of butyl tape, and then carefully placed the piece of polycarbonate over that exactly where I wanted it to be. And I pre-cut the top and bottom pieces of trim, but I didn't cut the rounded sides because I wasn't entirely sure exactly where it would be. So I installed the top piece and then bent the 2 side pieces, went and cut them while Julia held the curve in place, and then came back, installed the side pieces, and then I could go in and install the bottom piece. Damn, that one was super effective. She used hammer. It was effective. So unfortunately, the spot I picked to put the latch, I arbitrarily picked really late at night while against a deadline, and I of course picked the spot where it would interfere with the counter. So it's fine. I just marked off the center, and then I decided to just reuse the same shape from the cabinets by reusing that router template. And so I took a little chunk out of the counter so that the galley could close properly. And then to mount the solar panel, I just did some minor surface prep and actually used VHB, which is very high bond. It's like an extremely sticky double-sided tape, and that seems to be holding up just fine. But if it falls off at some point, I'll post on Instagram about it. I also needed to wire up the roof vent. When I was first running all the wiring, I thought it was a good idea to run it externally, but seeing the way that the roof vent goes in and was designed, I really should have wired this before the roof went on, but c'est la vie, you live and learn. It will be wired on the exterior with the solar panel. Next, I just wrapped up the interior wiring, so I built this little outlet box that will like neatly house the USB ports and the 12-volt port, and so I just wired it up, did some basic cable management, and installed that. The aluminum trim comes with a groove and also a PVC insert that covers all of the screws and keeps things like nice and watertight, so I just went in and inserted that. For the interior, I needed a floor, even though the mattress is going to be sitting on it and covering it most of the time, so I waffled for a while and then opted for just this vinyl peel and stick floor tiles. I didn't love the use of vinyl just because like it's not good for the environment and it's kind of cheap, but it was $1 a square foot, so you know. For the kitchenette area, I had this cute idea where I wanted to embed a national parks map in epoxy, so I stained that plywood blue, glued the map down, and then poured tabletop epoxy over all of that. Custom windows are usually a pain, but I saved a ton of time because I was able to model them in DraftSight ahead of time, handily export those DXFs, and then laser cut templates for the cutouts as well as the windows themselves. And once I had my templates, I jigsawed the loose shape and then trim routed them to their final shape. And what I did here was actually make the interior panel cutout just a bit smaller than the exterior hole so that the window could inset and have something to sit up against. And then I just took the two door panels and glued them and screwed them together. One of the hardest parts of this project, I think, was actually bending the aluminum door trim to fit the outside of the door, because instead of bending around something, you have to bend into a curve, and it was some pretty tight curves, so what we ended up having to do was actually to heat the aluminum and use like frames to bend around, and then just slowly work the aluminum, go fit it against the door, work the aluminum some more, go fit it against the door. Once we figured out how to do it, it was not so bad, but also I was just getting like kind of burned out of the project by this point, so it felt like an additional challenge, but it's also really fun. I will add, if you are going to attempt this, be really, really careful, because aluminum doesn't show you when it's hot the way that like steel does. It doesn't glow, and so you just like make sure that you're being super safe about it. We then bent the T-shaped aluminum trim around the doors and went over to give it a test fit for the first time, just to find out it doesn't fit.
It does look very cool with the light. God. My favorite part about building teardrop trailers is when the door doesn't fit.
How you feeling?
Okay, it's the next morning. I finally got like full 8 hours of sleep because I was like, I can't continue. And I'm gonna try to take 3/16 off the side of the doors, retrim them, and then see if they fit. So let's see. So off came the trim, and then I used a 3/16 rabbit bit, so it cut 3/16 in from the edge all the way around. I skipped the door hinge side because I think that was okay, and then a flush trim bit after that to bring the whole thing down the 3/16. Then that trim went back on, I trimmed the trim, and thank goodness it fit. And a door that fits means it's allowed to have hinges. Okay, it is 6:25 p.m., Thursday, August 25th. Midnight marks the end of 3 weeks officially. Woo! And the doors are going on.
Door's going on.
Door's going on! So we shimmed the door off the bottom, and then Julia held it firmly in place while I attached the hinges to the trailer side.
And with the doors on, I really felt like I earned this peel. Then the last minute installation of door latches, and it was time to push this trailer out of my driveway. And in exchange for all their hours of incredible help, all Piper and Nico got was the privilege of the last peel.
Let's make the peel like look really smooth and sexy. Nice.
You did it! Okay, so I maybe lied a little bit. It was 3 weeks plus 1 day. I had one rollover day where I had to install the windows and the tongue box, but to install the windows, all I did was pop rivets in the hinges to get those on and then just screw them on to the trailer. And then for the latches, it was a similar thing. Drilled holes on the window side, installed rivets, and then I can mount it with screws to the door. And then it was just final details of things like gaskets on the doors. I attached the tongue box, and then I just had to install the wiring into the tongue box with the battery. And just like that, the trailer is ready to go. All I had to do was move in and get ready to hit the road. Making the teardrop camper was an incredible experience, and using Draft Site allowed my vision to become a reality. So a huge thank you to them for sponsoring this video.
Every change